In 1897, British composer Edward Elgar sent an apparently encoded message to a young lady named Dora Penny. She did not successfully decipher it and only later published it in a memoir in 1937, 3 years after Elgar died. It is known generally as the Dorabella Cipher, after a nickname the composer gave to Miss Penny. Over the years that have followed its publication, it has defied all attempts to convincingly crack its code. I will establish in this video that the Dorabella cipher is a nonsensical message by demonstrating that it contains two separate traits, each one of which is so statistically improbable that it would cast serious doubt on this being a legitimately coded message. I worked for 4 years at the National Security Agency after 9/11 as an Arabic linguist. Even though I was not a cryptographer, I was formally trained there in the principles of code making and breaking. As you can see, the Dorabella cipher is constructed from symbols of 1, 2, or 3 semicircles, each of which has 8 potential orientations. Years after sending this message to Miss Penny, Elgar included a description of a similar code in one of his journals. You can see that he lists the symbols by orientation and assigns these symbols to the letters of the alphabet in order, making I and J use the same symbol, as well as U and V to fit the 26 letters of the English alphabet into the 24 symbols of this code. Now, when you apply the letters of the code from his journal to the Dorabella cipher, you get absolute gibberish. So clearly, either the Dorabella cipher assigns different letters to the symbols, or something else is going on here. I will demonstrate that the something else going on is that Edward Elgar used these symbols to intentionally create a nonsensical message. This may have been intended as a playful joke. Perhaps after she had tried and failed to solve the puzzle, he planned to eventually tell her that it was undecipherable. In her memoir, however, she does not indicate that they ever discussed the matter again after it was sent. Like many other well-intentioned scholars, I too attempted a decipherment of this puzzle. But in the course of my efforts, I noticed two very peculiar things. Number 1, in each of the 3 lines of the Dorabella cipher, there is a long series where there is no repeat of a symbol with the same number of semicircles. Again, recall that there are 3 types of symbols in this message, symbols with 1, 2, or 3 semicircles. Because the letters are supposedly assigned to the arbitrary code in alphabetical order, these long series would appear to be statistically improbable. To explore this issue, I encoded an actual English text with 2 different versions of the Elgar cipher, the one he showed us in his journal, and another formed by listing all 8 orientations of 1 semicircle, followed by 2 semicircles, and so on. Using these 2 codes, I encoded the first 3 lines of the first stanza of Lord Byron's poem, She Walks in Beauty, because it has roughly the same number of characters as the Dorabella cipher. I created 2 versions of this test because I very much wanted to discover what we should expect an actual encoded message to display in terms of stretches without repeated symbols of the same number of semicircles. Here's what we find. The longest series without a repeat in my 2 controls is 6 long. The other control had its longest series only 5 long. So now let's look back at Edward Elgar's message to Dora Penny. At the very beginning of the cipher, there are a baffling 12 symbols in a row without a repeated number of semicircles. But if that weren't enough, the second line of the cipher starts with 9 symbols in a row without such a repeat. And if even that weren't enough, line 3 has a series, 8 long, with no repeated symbol of the same number of semicircles. Now, in a randomly generated message, the chances of there being a series of 12 symbols in a row without repeating a symbol of the same number of semicircles would be 1 in 532,793. Our two samples certainly demonstrate that a series of 12 in an actual encoded message is not expected. To then see an additional such series of 9 in line 2, and then one 8 long in line 3, becomes statistically improbable, to say the least. But then note something else quite peculiar about these three series. Two of them occur at the very beginning of their lines, and the third is found in the first half of its line. Keep in mind, the potential that the Dorabella cipher is a real message and yet is employing encryption beyond a simple substitution cipher does not explain away this observation. Quite the contrary. Additional encryption would make the symbols on the message even more random and thus render these series all the more statistically impossible. This is consistent with my theory that he was playing a joke on Dora, creating a message that could not be deciphered because there was no message here. And so, he starts each line working to create pure randomness. As he creates this joke, however, he succumbs to normal human laziness, and he then begins producing a second trait that only further proves there is no real message here at all. And so, on to my second observation. There are simply far too many mirrored symbols in the Dorabella cipher. There are two ways that a symbol could potentially appear to our eye to be a mirror image of itself. Using symbols from my controls, you can see that the symbols pointed directly north, east, south, or west have only one symbol that is their mirror image. The other four orientations have potentially two symbols that seem to mirror one another. There is the symbol that is a true reflection, and there is the symbol that mirrors by inversion. Let's calculate the rate at which we should expect to see mirror images in the Dorabella cipher. There are 24 total symbols. 12 of them have only one mirror image, 12 have two. When we calculate the possible mirrors that could occur after each symbol in each separate line of the Dorabella cipher, we predict either type of mirror to occur 5.5 times total in the message. Instead, there are 13 times in the Dorabella cipher when a symbol is followed by what appears to be a mirrored image. For a window into the significance of this development, let's look back at my two controls on this very point. The message using Elgar's code predicts 5.3 mirrors. 6 happen. That's not a statistically significant difference. The alternate code predicts 5 mirrors. That's exactly what we see there. And yet the Dorabella cipher includes far more mirrors than we should have expected. I assert this happened because after he started each line, avoiding symbols of the same number of semicircles, he then understandably got a bit lazy and finished outlines by occasionally dropping in various types of mirrored symbols. And in the second line, he got so casual with this exercise that he produced something truly statistically impossible: 4 mirrored pairs in a row. And if all that weren't enough, look at this. With the single exception of line 3, all of these mirrors occur only after the curiously long stretches of no repeats on semicircle number. Indeed, can it really be a coincidence that every time he ends these statistically improbable series, he immediately includes mirrored pairs, and 2 times he has 2 mirrored pairs in a row? In the end, there are indeed 2 statistically improbable or even impossible things happening in the Dorabella cipher. One of the statistically improbable things occurs only in the first half of each line. The other tends to occur in the second half of each line. Either one of these traits happening anywhere in the lines would cast serious doubt on this being a real message. The fact that instead they appear grouped as they do on separate sides of each other becomes a final and convincing proof that Edward Elgar was constructing a nonsensical message as a playful joke for a friend. The Dorabella cipher was indeed a joke that Edward Elgar once played on a young lady. Because she published it years later, it then turned into a joke he accidentally played on all of us who love a good cryptological puzzle. But I believe I have demonstrated in this video that it was indeed just a joke, and therefore it deserves no further time or energy from any of us.